Snowballs Chance by Katy Haye. Snowball arrived at the back door just as Mac was finishing up cooking. The furball had a sixth sense for when food was available. Mac pushed the door open. "Come in, madame. The restaurant will be open shortly. May I offer an amuse-bouche for your delectation?" He fetched kibble from the cupboard and dropped a handful into a clean dish. He set it on the floor with a flourish. Snowball stepped forward, dark fur gleaming, and sniffed warily. "Created by the finest chefs for madame's pleasure," he assured her. Not for the first time, the thought crept into his head that he spent far too much time talking to his cat and should probably get a few human friends. Human friends were hard to come by when you worked shifts as unpredictable as Mac's, though. "You're married to your work," an ex-girlfriend had complained, as she transitioned from being his girlfriend to being an ex. "I can't compete, and frankly, I don't want to." That had hurt, but not for very long, because she was right. Mac loved his job, far more than he loved any girl he'd ever dated. Snowball was the only woman he really needed, loving but never needy. Mac drained the pasta and plated his meal, putting a couple of pieces of chicken into Snowball's bowl. She wolfed them down. He took his plate and a fork into the lounge and dropped onto the sofa. Snowball stalked across the carpet and jumped up beside him. Mac couldn't be sure whether she was following him or the food. He took a bite. Snowball sat closer, setting a paw plaintively on his arm. Screw that, she was definitely following the food. He offered her another piece of chicken, and she took it delicately. Mac ate another mouthful and pulled out the documents he'd brought home from work, a bad habit that also mitigated against finding and keeping a girlfriend, but worked just fine when his companion was Snowball. He spread them around the sofa cushions on his spare side. As he dug into his meal, offering the occasional scrap of chicken to Snowball, he looked through all the evidence he'd accumulated so far. He was at a dead end. He knew exactly what was happening, who was supplying the drugs causing misery across the city. Mac had a name, Tommy Grenville. What he didn't have was evidence, at least nothing substantial enough to persuade prosecutors to issue a warrant. He shuffled through the papers one last time, as though something might jump up and bite him. Nothing. A bunch of, legally, unconnected businesses, most of which didn't even have a connection to Tommy Grenville. And no judge was going to help him out when all he had was a hunch. Snowball, finally sated, curled up against his thigh and began purring. Mac finished his meal and one hand dropped to pet her fur while he tried to calculate his next move. Forget it. That was what his friends at the station recommended. But he couldn't. He wasn't an idealist. 20 years as a police officer had beaten that out of him. He knew bad people did bad things and got away with them every day. He just couldn't let this one go. He took a breath, apparently deep enough to jostle Snowball. She stood up and glared at him, amber eyes almost glowing against her black fur. Her name, of course, was a joke. Mac had planned to call her Midnight, her fur being the dark sky and her eyes the moon. His girlfriend, the same one strangely enough, had decided that didn't suit and called her Snowball instead. It had stuck. Mac stroked her ears and she jumped off the sofa, stalking to the door and loudly demanding he open it. Mac got up to obey, then decided he might as well follow the cat's example. He was too restless to sit and reflect on all the nothing he'd achieved in the last 6 months. A walk would do him good. He stepped into his shoes and pulled on a jacket. "Are you a good influence, making sure I get exercise and fresh air? Taking good care of me, eh?" he asked Snowball. She gave no reply, running out of the door the moment he opened it. "I'll see you later," he called, even though he already couldn't make her out from the shadows. Mac dug his hands into his pockets and started to walk. He didn't have a conscious destination in mind, but he was unsurprised when his feet took him to a club in the middle of town. Not just any club, Tommy Grenville's club, which actually had his name on the deeds. Mac loitered outside. Music spilled from the inside. There was a queue, although very few people seemed to be getting inside. Mac wondered what that was about. A crime syndicate get-together, probably. Invitation only. He sighed. He had no proof of anything. He had to stop obsessing. Something would happen that would give him an in, but he couldn't force it to happen. The music spilling from the club was good. Really good. Perhaps it wasn't a crime syndicate get-together, but just a good musician being appreciated by their audience. The vocals stopped while the band kept playing. A few people left, and a matching number were allowed inside by the bouncers. Mac didn't bother to join the queue. He was sure the bouncers would know who he was, and he wouldn't be welcome. The door at the back of the club banged open, snagging Mac's attention. Sequins gleamed under the single streetlight as a man paused, took a drag on his vape, then tipped his head to blow the vapour into the night air. Recognition nagged at Mac. He stepped towards the man while he waited for his brain to catch up. It was a shock when it did, seeing the unfamiliar glittery eyeshadow on eyes he'd seen on surveillance photos. "You're TJ, aren't you? You've changed your look." That came out more judgmental than he intended. It didn't matter what he looked like, and there was no point being crabby at the son. He couldn't help the fact that Tommy Grenville was his father. Although he wasn't a child, he must know what his father did, where the money came from, which made him at least partly culpable in Mac's book. The young man exhaled his vape and a cloud of candy floss scent hit Mac in the face. "I don't recall asking your opinion," he replied coolly. "Sorry, that came out wrong. You look great." Mac never had a problem stating the truth. It was lies that irritated him. TJ's lips twisted. "Again, I don't recall asking your opinion." Mac should have known better, but he couldn't help his hackles rising. What a graceless yob. "Pardon me for making conversation. Might not kill you to be civil." "Maybe it would. My father wouldn't like me to be talking to a policeman." A denial sprang to the tip of Mac's tongue, but he swallowed it down. It never paid to treat witnesses as though they were stupid. "I'm not on duty now. The club's busy, it sounds good. A new singer? That you?" TJ pushed off the wall. "Cops are never off duty, and I don't have any obligation to answer your questions." He headed towards the back door. Everything was slipping through Mac's fingers, the way it always had where Tommy Grenville was concerned. "Drugs ruin lives," he called before TJ was out of earshot. The man paused, back stiffening. Mac was almost sure he was going to keep walking, pretending not to hear. Finally, TJ glanced back. "I know that." "Your father ruins lives," Mac said, throwing caution to the wind. Instinct told him TJ wouldn't hurt him, but the club was his father's. He doubtless had some heavies stashed around the place. TJ wouldn't need to hurt him because someone else would do the dirty work. "Not anymore," TJ said. It was softly spoken. Mac thought he must have misheard. "What?" "He's sold up. He's retired, as of tonight." Mac wanted to protest. Something so momentous, he'd know. The news would be all over the city, criminals and police alike. But TJ's words had the ring of truth. The young man's lips twisted. "You're too late." TJ took another step. It was a desperate final throw of the dice. "Hey!" TJ paused, although he didn't look around this time. "You want to give me the name of whoever's taking over?" TJ huffed softly. He glanced back. "I already told you. I have no plans to answer your questions, Mr. Policeman." The rear door opened, then clanged shut behind TJ. Tommy Grenville had given up. The idea was unthinkable. Was it a lie and he'd fallen for a poker face, like the daftest rookie ever to put on a uniform? While Mac was still staring at the back wall of the club, hoping he hadn't entirely lost his senses, the radio in his pocket crackled. He tugged it out, checked the call sign and twisted the volume. The garbled sound settled into sense, although he wasn't truly listening. He wasn't on duty, should have left his radio behind. Then he heard his own name. He lifted the radio, pressing to connect. "This is Mac. What's up?" The voice that responded was crackly, but clear. "Can you confirm? We've just heard that Tommy Grenville has given up his life of crime." Another voice broke in. "No way! That's a bluff, right?" "No." Mac cleared his throat. "I heard it, not exactly from the horse's mouth, but from a close source. It's not a bluff." More crackling, a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, then, "You'll need to get a new hobby, Mac." "Yeah, I guess so." Mac dialed the volume right down so he couldn't hear any more of the chatter. All his work come to nothing. Tommy Grenville had outwitted him in the end, by giving up. It should be a victory, but it just felt unsatisfactory. Someone else would take over. TJ might not tell him a name, but he didn't deny that someone had stepped into his father's shoes. Mac would just have to figure out who. Energy returning, he turned for home. He hoped Snowball would be there. He needed to talk through his next steps, and Snowball was a great listener. That was Snowballs Chance by Katy Haye. If you want to hear more stories, hit like and subscribe and you'll be notified when a video is up. Thanks for listening.